I want to welcome everybody back. It's the middle of the week, and again, time to check in. And this week, we wanted to do something a little bit different again, and maybe kind of reflect on what it's been like over the last 3 months, because this social isolation has been going on for a while because of COVID-19. And I've actually invited Liz Pellman Webb, who's a longtime member of the Westview congregation, to talk with me a bit about this. In particular, as a single mom and a working mom, how this has gone. But anyways, Liz, thanks for being willing to be a part of this. First of all, let me just hand it over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. For those who don't know you, tell us a bit about your household. Yeah.
So yes, I have been at Westview a long time. I moved to London in 1985 from Guelph, where we were part of a great church family. So it was hard to get adjusted, but we were made very welcome by the pastors at the time of Westview, and it was little. It was just moving from the portable into the big building. So seeing it go through a lot of changes. And that's been wonderful to see it grow and change. And so I'm a full-time single mom of 2 children. My husband died, I guess it'll be 8.5 years ago around now, suddenly. And so my girls are in grade 9 and grade 4, and I am a teacher. So I spent most of my career teaching English. I'm now a teacher librarian. So I have been working from home. They have been working from home. And we would think that being a teacher would have made this just a cakewalk and no problem to help my kids through school. But like everyone, I have faced challenges, but I am grateful I have not faced as many challenges as some single parents.
Okay. Well, and I do want to get into some of your experience of it. But first of all, tell us, how have your daughters adjusted to this new reality of studying and living and working all in the same space?
So my daughter in grade 9 is a very personally motivated student to begin with. So she fared fairly well. There was a time, probably about literally halfway through, that she kind of lost momentum, and she kind of came to me and said, "Mom, I haven't really been doing anything for phys ed for a couple weeks." And she was doing really great. They've been doing lots of healthy living things. So they were doing Zumba online. She actually set up some things where she Skyped with her friends. Actually, both my kids did this, is they would Skype or use WhatsApp or one of those programs like Zoom, and they could be online with their friends and doing some work at the same time, whether that was schoolwork or games. My younger daughter liked to play Minecraft that way, but my older daughter was actually doing her workouts for phys ed with a friend who went to a different school. And one day they would do the workouts from the school of her friend, and the next day they would do. And so that was really good, but partway along the line, she kind of lost momentum and told me she was behind in her music assignments and behind because they're hard. They were online theory stuff and things that she didn't know, and it was hard to ask questions. Her music teacher did have some Google Meets where she could get on and ask questions, but then when we're out of a normal routine, she wouldn't, she wasn't great at tracking when those were. So then, an hour after it was supposed to have happened, she's like, "Oh, I missed that meeting." So I think I actually missed a staff meeting at the first time because I wasn't used to having a staff meeting at 10:30 on a Thursday morning. It was just not on my radar. And then, something comes up, somebody needs me to do something. So I'm drawn away from the thing I'm doing.
So we as adults have new routines, and the kids have totally new routines as well. Everybody's adjusting. Yeah.
So at one point I just said, you know what, just start today. Look at what's on for agenda for this week. Write your teacher a note. Tell her the things that you've been doing while you weren't submitting any assignments, and just start today and carry on from here. This is a new time. Everyone's trying to figure it out. The government has made some really great concessions for students. So this shouldn't be our biggest worry right now. Yeah. Now, my daughter in grade 4 sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Keep going.
My daughter in grade 4 is a little bit different. She is really great. She has great strengths in oral and visual learning. So watching videos and knowing what was coming out of those, she was really independent to, watch a science video, and then she would answer a questionnaire on that. But, doing some of her reading and for sure math. And I wanted to make sure I knew how she was being taught so that I could help her. that was more of a stress. So she needed a lot more guidance there. So I'm trying to divide my time. One day, I think it was just even last week, actually. It was an afternoon. I was trying to finish some emails, and I'm working on a project at school. So I was doing my work. And like every 5 minutes, someone was interrupting me. Mom, can you help me with this? Mom, can you help me with this? And it's like, no, I can't, but I did, right? So then you stop doing what you're doing and you go help that person for 10 minutes, and then you try and come back to what you were in the middle of. And so we didn't have too many days of that, but there's been those days where it's just, and then we have to eat, so there were some days when, my kids would come to me at 2:00 in the afternoon and say, Mom, we haven't had lunch yet, because I was so engrossed in something I was doing for work that I just, I wasn't hungry. So I didn't really think of the time that had been passing. So even though I have a sister who does a lot of work from home before COVID, and said, you really have to put things in, even if it's a timer. Mm-hmm. So I did do a schedule. I called it Camp COVID at the Webb household. And that didn't last very long, but it was kind of more of, okay, we're going to structure, schoolwork here and mom's work here and housework here and lunch in the middle. And
so you attempted a schedule. You attempted to kind of arrange the day in a certain way, but you see that didn't last?
It doesn't quite last, because I found that if I jumped on my computer right away in the morning, then I didn't get everybody else that organized. So then it's like, okay, well, I have to organize everybody, then I can go do my work. And I do know there were other teachers who said, basically, I didn't work till from 9. I started work at 9:00 at night when my kids were in bed, because that was the only time. If you have little kids, my kids are older, it was better. Yeah. But there's still, and then the phone rings because people know you're home now, mm-hmm. So do you ignore the phone? So it's been an interesting juggling act.
Yeah. So how are you managing to or trying to strike a balance between the work life and the home life at this point?
I think we're hitting it. I think we're understanding that this is a unique and strange time. And if we try our best, and we really are trying our best to do the things we need to do to fulfill our expectations, right? So I understand my kids' schooling throughout this is not going to be integral to their success in life. But it does, there are things that they need to learn. My daughter in grade 4 already was kind of missing some stuff. So it's been a good time for us to catch up. In terms of my life, again, in my job, I'm doing the best I can. And that's all anyone can expect of me. And that's all I should expect of myself. And whether our meals have been, stellar at the beginning, because it happened right after March break and there wasn't a lot in place, we baked some muffins and we gave them out to our neighbors as a little cheer me up sort of thing. And that kind of stuff hasn't continued as much. But I think giving yourself a break is a big part of it, to go, this is unusual times and we're not going to do it perfectly, and that's okay.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting what you just said. You'll have to remind me how you exactly said it, but basically this time is not going to be crucial to your kids, overall life and education. Tell me a little bit more about that, because I'm not sure everybody has really reached that in their own mind.
So I think I have some perspective. My mom is 89 years old, grew up in Hitler Germany during the war. So in Germany, right during the war, she was a child. Yeah. She had very patchy schooling, probably for the last 4 years before grade 8, when her school was, so she had 3 months of grade 8, then her school was bombed out. She never returned to school, ever. And now my mom is a very motivated, intelligent woman, so she's done a huge amount of reading in her lifetime since. She, ended up working for Sears and working on commission and being a salesperson when she became a single mom. And she's always had jobs inside and outside the home. So, part of me says, it life hands you lemons, you make lemonade kind of thing. Like this, the fact that, maybe my daughter didn't understand long division perfectly, because long division almost did me in one day. She'll get it. She'll get it eventually. All the people in education right now know that kids are hit and miss. We know like at my school, some teachers are only getting 50% participation from their whole class. Some kids have just said, no way. Some parents have said, I can't do this. I spoke to a parent on the phone early in COVID. She was an essential worker. She had 2 high school sons at home. Her husband worked in Toronto and ended up staying in Toronto during, I don't know how long for the period.
Yeah.
So she was essentially a single mom working 16 hours a day. And I went, yeah, schoolwork is going to be the lowest priority in that household. And you know what? That's okay. We will figure it out. They have their lifetime to learn.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about grace, right?
Yeah.
We're not just to extend grace to others. We do have to accept the grace that God has given us as well, that we can't be perfect. We can't do it all. We're not superheroes.
And this isn't the first time in history. It's funny because when we went through this early, I think late March, my daughter turned to me, my grade 9 daughter, so Mom, like, how often has this happened to you that schools have been closed? And I said, never in my lifetime. I said, the longest time we've ever had off is like, I think in 2011, we had 3 snow days in a row. I said, that's the only time I've ever missed that much school in a row. And I used to live out in the country where there's snow. I said, and certainly never for anything of sickness. But, through this, looking back at the polio epidemic, looking back at, my mom talked about the typhus epidemic during the war, tuberculosis epidemic. This is not the first time in history. You don't have to even go all the way back to the plague to say, and I teach Shakespeare. So, they closed the theaters, they stopped businesses. This isn't the first time, and humanity, and we've survived it, and we're going to survive this one too.
Well, and again, it highlights, our God-given capacity to adjust and adapt. If we're willing to, we have to be willing to it. It's funny, as you talk about the kind of the shifts and adjustments that you and your girls made over the last few months. And, early on when we first entered the lockdown, my son came to me and he said, Dad, we've got time on our hands. We should learn a language. And I shared that with people. We decided we would learn Welsh. And then I realized, for us in our household, things had not slowed down. Things were as busy, just in a different way. And so something I took on thinking I would have lots of time has now been mostly set aside because it just became onerous. And we do. We have to adjust as we go along.
The one thing the one thing that has slowed down for me is it has been nice not to have to rush out to appointments, right? So whether it's somebody's lesson they have to go to, my children have been doing piano lessons through Skype. So I don't have to drive them to piano lessons. That's like half an hour I don't have to do driving in the car. So I have found that has been helpful, even though grocery shopping takes longer. Yeah. But I don't have to do it as often. I mean, I tended to be the person who didn't like to grocery shop every day anyway. But, it has made me more conscious of things that I plan. And it has been a different kind of busyness. But I have enjoyed not having that busyness of going out. And I think it's going to make us all reprioritize what we do and when we do it and why we do it.
Yeah. And there's been so much pressure in our culture on parents to get their kids plugged into all the right activities. And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money. And yet we've survived without those things. Not that we want to give them up all wholesale, but we have survived without them for 3 months. And you're right. I think we are going to be doing a lot of reprioritizing. So just beyond the logistics, beyond the schedules, and you've kind of hinted at this, what kinds of low points have you and your girls had to work through during the last 3 months?
Certainly, I mean, the ironic thing is I am a teacher, but I don't teach grade 4 math, right? I teach English, so, and I was always a pretty good student. I know how to divide. I don't know how to teach someone how to divide or the concept of division. And so, and I did think through some things and thank goodness for YouTube, honestly, because there were a lot of instructional videos. Her teacher was good at putting some stuff out. And if we didn't understand that version, I'd go look for a different thing. That maybe explained it in a different way. And we use blueberries to do the division and get the concepts, but she's moving into bigger numbers. So certainly the teaching of things that I'm not as familiar with, and I even supply taught elementary school for a while, and feeling that pressure of, I got to do it right. And I think when I finally gave myself permission to go, it's okay. And actually it was my daughter who gave me that permission. She said to me, Mom, just teach it to me the way you know how to teach it.
Good for her.
Instead of, because I was like, well, what if I don't teach it the way that your teachers do it? Then in grade
Yeah.
5, you're not going to know what you're doing. And
Yeah.
she said, just teach it to me the way you know how to do it. And I went, okay, I can do that. And I think that certainly the low point of feeling the responsibility of it all
Yeah.
on my shoulders, and again, I was in a very, very blessed financial position because I have a job.
Mm-hmm.
My paycheck hasn't stopped and it has been coming in regularly, and I didn't have to apply for government assistance. So I know that my situation is incredibly privileged compared to many, many other single parents.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that insecurity, not knowing, one point, I was out shopping and I've never had a panic attack in my life. But I think I had a small panic attack. At one point, I was like, oh my gosh, these people are too close to me. And I felt like I couldn't breathe. Yeah. And I had to kind of just stop, and I prayed. I stood right in front of the grocery store and prayed and went, Lord, okay, help me have some peace about this. And I just did some deep breathing, and I just went, okay, just get what you need and get out. It'll be okay. Because my pressure is kind of twofold. One is I have an 89-year-old mother who I do some good help for. She's not in a nursing home, but I bring her meals and things like that. So I had contact. I tried to have as much distance contact as possible. But because my husband is deceased, I am the only one for my kids. They have lots of other family members, but I'm the only parent, and they've already been through a tragic death in their life. That was very, very difficult. And now, because some people, well, if you're of the age, if you got sick, it wouldn't be so bad. Well, it would be. If they saw me sick with a disease they knew other people had died from, that would be pretty traumatic. And if I did end up in the hospital, I know there were people who would be able to care for them, but they couldn't have come to see me. And that would have been a trauma all over again for them. So I was very conscious, and I felt a lot of pressure, and still do to some degree, to say, no, I need to maybe take more caution than the average person. And it does bother me when people are cavalier about this, because, I may not be in a high risk group, but I have different risks, and any single parent has a different risk, that they're the one that's responsible for the care of their children. And if they aren't available to do that, that's a big problem.
Yeah, we can't make assumptions. We can't make assumptions about other people's situations. And I mean, we're seeing more and more of it. Everybody is having to make hard decisions about how they handle life and visits and errands and more than that. But yeah, it just brings a whole new perspective on that. You are their only parent. And
and many parents, or whether they have a deceased spouse or an ex-spouse, or a spouse, a child's parent who doesn't have much to do with them, or lives in a different province, or lives in a different country, or all those sorts of things, you're kind of it. And so that's pressure on you, and so it gives an extra weight to some of this that maybe other people don't feel. And like I said, I'm a person, I'm pretty chill about a lot of things in terms of that. So I was very surprised when I had that reaction in public. And again, I'm so blessed. We have a yard, so my kids have been able to play outside every day. Our neighborhood has been really great. Lots of people have been walking and talking to each other at a distance, and, giving each other the space that we need. But again, I don't live in downtown Toronto, where there is little very space. Yeah.
Well, and what you're saying about that kind of shocking moment of panic, I know, as I've talked to different people, I've heard different ones describe kind of similar situations, not necessarily a panic attack, but a moment of realization where, I don't like this, or I don't know what to do here. And I mean, I've had my own situations like this over the last 3 months, and they completely catch you off guard. But what's interesting is that you've described that moment, and then you actually had the conversation with God in the moment about it. And obviously that conversation has been ongoing as he's kind of revealed what's going on in your life and what inspired that. It sounds like there's been a lot more self-awareness about that too.
For sure. Yeah. And just, even with my kids. This can be a really scary time. I do know that kind of early in the game, I watched, every day we were watching the numbers and news and talking about it a lot. And there came a point when you're like, you know what, this is too much.
Mm-hmm.
We just have to, we'll stay in our bubble and do our things and do the right things and listen to the proper health precautions, but we can't be bombarded with this. Even somebody the other day said, well, cases in London have really gone down. And I realized I hadn't looked at the news or I hadn't looked at the stats to see where we were at.
Yeah.
As things, especially as things were opening up.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I can't have that as a constant bombardment or constant worry. It's hard to have peace when everything's stirred. And I don't blame the media and the government and everything for doing all these daily things. Information is good, and I guess I'm a dealer in information. I'm a librarian, right? Yeah. I do understand that information is good, and good sources of information are so important because there's a lot with the internet. There's a lot of information out there that is not particularly good or accurate or beneficial. But too much information can also breed an uneasiness that doesn't need to be there.
Yeah, it makes you feel like that's all there is to life. Yeah. And the fact is, a lot of that is out of our control.
Yeah.
And God asks us to live the life that is in our control.
Yeah. And he walks with us through that life. And
yeah.
I know that it's hard when something like this happens. It's really hard because you start to question, well, where is God in all of this? Right? Bottom line is we live in a fallen world. We live in a sinful world. Bad things are going to happen in this world. That is, we don't live in heaven. We don't live in paradise yet. And so these things are going to happen. And I trust that, like he has been there for me in this, and he has given me peace, and he has given me strength, and he's given me patience when I'm about to, when I've lose it. I've had those moments for sure. Those screaming moments happen in my house. Don't ever kid myself that they don't. But in those moments, he's given me the thing I need. And so I'm trusting that all around the world, as everyone is facing this, he is giving those things to people too, whether they know him or not. God doesn't discriminate. He doesn't, the rain falls on the just and the unjust. So he is, his presence is Holy Spirit. And that's actually one of the things my kids and I prayed a lot in the early days. I'm like, Holy Spirit, just cover this globe, and make your presence known to those people that are suffering and grieving and going through this. In whatever way you can, because we know that God comes to us as a whisper. He comes to us in many, many different ways. And he comes to us in visions and dreams and all sorts of different ways that God can speak to us. So, my prayer was just that people would feel his presence in this moment of.
So as you've gone through this, has God led you into new and unknown places with your faith? Like, where's the stretch been?
I think it's just, again, more leaning in. I've had lots of places in my life to grow my faith. I think the interesting thing is, when I look at all the things I've been in my life, this is not the worst one. And I think giving me that perspective, in those moments when you feel like, oh, is this going to be terrible? Is this never going to end? And he says, look back to where I guided, look back to the past, see how I've got you through this. Losing my husband was way more tragic than this was, because I haven't lost a person that I loved. Thinking about people who are grieving right now. A good friend of mine, her father died in Calgary during COVID, not COVID related, but COVID complicated, because he ended up going to the hospital for something else. And as an elderly person, he couldn't recover from some of that and things like that. And she's far away, right? And so grieving. So I look at that and, tried to give myself perspective. And I think that's how God grows my faith. I think it's helped me he's given me words to say to my children to calm them. He's prompted me to do things like, and prompted my daughter to say, hey, let's give muffins to our neighbors, right? To just help them through that. So I think putting our faith in action, we've been able to help at the food cupboard at Westview. which I normally don't get to help with because it's on a weekday morning. Well, I could flex my schedule so that I could do that.
Mhm.
And it's been really amazing for my children. I think it's helped them grow their faith because they can see how God is using us to bless other people.
Yeah.
And again, help us understand. I think it's very difficult in today's world to help kids not to understand their entitlement, not entitlement, to not make them entitled, right? Help them understand their privilege so they don't feel entitled.
Right.
And, and to hear stories of when I was little, I received that kind of blessing from a person who brought us food when we didn't have it. And now it's kind of come full circle to me be able to do that for others. And, I think those little ways it grows my faith.
Yeah.
Because your faith grows every day if you're talking to God.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's discipleship. It's not events that change us. It's the incremental conversation and little stretches all the way along. And it's interesting. The last 3 months have I think stretched all of us in new ways. It's also stretching the church. We would never have imagined a time this long where churches like Westview wouldn't have met together. And it's new territory for us. Like you say, historically it's not new, but for us it's new, and we're being stretched. And as we kind of reimagine who we are as a church and how we move forward from this, we have the opportunity to speak into it in new ways. And I'm just curious for you, as a single mom, what are things that we as a church need to understand? Like how maybe could we have supported you better, or how could we have been the church better through a time like this?
It's hard because we live in a world that is so physical.
Yeah.
So I know one of the things that my sister did for me and did for our family, kind of as her mission in a way, she sent daily poetry to myself and my nieces and nephews who all have little kids as well. Mm-hmm. And she started with just sending a picture of a poem for the day to just give them something, like especially when there wasn't much coming out of, right after March break, wasn't much coming out of schools. But her poetry also became inspirational. It was sometimes very much about spring and things like that. And then as the racial tension in the United States increased, it became about equity and racism and anti-racism and things like that. And then the other day we recorded something about thunderstorms. So, a little pick-me-up, right? So she provided something to that those families that were feeling a little bit more at loose ends. And I think that our Wednesday night, or your Wednesday message and Sunday has been good. I know that, we did do some phone calling for people who were shut in or maybe didn't have access to internet and things like that. I mean, I'm a technology skeptic on some levels, and I've been really grateful for what technology has been able to us to do as a church. But we are so used to being physically connected, right? And certainly what a single parent needs during this kind of stuff is a break, right? Because it's 24/7 you're parenting, and I don't ever consider school a babysitter, but it does provide that break that somebody else gets to input into my child's life and in a different way, and they can listen and accept that information coming from a teacher in a different way than they can from a parent. It's just the dynamics of life. So I think that what the church needs to understand is that we can be a support for those people who may not have much of a support network in terms of family, friends, etc. Certainly, I know I'm very proud that our food cupboard provides that tangible support of actual food when you're struggling. But I think it's hard, and I don't know how we would do it differently, but kind of that daily input or regular, maybe not daily, but that regular input for their kids to, maybe it would be hey, here's a video that's 20 minutes long, maybe even some recommended videos. Here's some recommended videos for your kids could watch them for 20 minutes and give you that 20 minutes to have your coffee and eat your bagel or whatever because you didn't have breakfast because you're too worried about everybody else's breakfast. You know, things like that. Just kind of, I'm thinking. I'm such a. My problem is I'm almost too self-reliant sometimes, so I don't look for help. And I think that's the other thing is that happens with single parenting too. We're so used to doing it all on our own all the time that it's hard for us to accept help, but it's also hard for us to even go look for help.
Right.
But if help is there and we kind of see, okay, this would enable me, right? Because church and our church programs and our children's programs does allow that kind of break, that time away. Yeah. But when we can't do that physically, how do we do that virtually? And I think it's a work in progress, but I'm actually glad it's helping us think through that process. I think it's helped a lot of churches think about what is our online presence. We know God is working because people are tuning into things they probably never would have tuned into and are hearing the gospel and are hearing about God's love for them, maybe in a way that they wouldn't have elsewhere, right? Yeah.
Our eyes have been opened to new possibilities.
Yeah, and it can be exciting if we let it be exciting. It can be scary and overwhelming if we see it that way. Yeah.
Well, and that's just it. Where the last few months have had, you know, in a sense, they've been scary, but they haven't just been scary. They, you know, as we realize that God is still at work, God is still alive. It does. He is making all things new. We need to be aware of what he is doing and be open to being a part of that. So,
anyway. Another thought I had about single parenting: adult conversations.
Yeah,
those are important.
Right. You mean as a single parent to be able to have those adult conversations?
Be having those adult conversations with other people because you're 24/7 with little ones who don't have those adult conversations. I mean, again, my daughter's 15, just turned 15. That is changing, right? We're having more of those in-depth conversations, but when they're little, that's harder. But technology gives us an interesting thing. I think one thing that holds people back from maybe becoming part of a small group or serving on a committee, I know myself as I would have to hire a babysitter when I went out of the house, or I was lucky enough to have some family members who covered that childcare for free. But that's a consideration every single time for a single parent. Who's going to look after my children? So one of the, it's both a disadvantage and an advantage. Disadvantage of having a Bible study through Zoom is that your kids are there and they might come in and interrupt. But you could also maybe do it when they've put them to bed, and then you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to hire a babysitter, and you can still participate in things. Which, when you physically have to go somewhere all the time, is a lot harder and may not be as necessary. So I think there's some good considerations for stuff like that.
Yeah, and again, going forward, even once we are able to be physically together, we need to remember the possibilities that have been opened up to us to take advantage of them. There's a time when we may want a hybrid of things. And I
remember when I served on a committee a few years ago, that was one of the things. I can't remember why we did our first Zoom meeting that way. You were on that committee with me.
I was.
I can't remember why we did our first Zoom. I think it was somebody, we couldn't find a mutual time or something and everyone can come, or maybe it was me saying I don't have childcare that night. I can't remember.
I'm not sure either, but there was a motivating factor, and
and we did about 50% of the meetings in person and 50% on Zoom, and that really eased up things for me. Because I didn't have to I just had to make sure they had something to do while I was online, but I didn't have to, figure out who was going to put them to bed and how that was going to happen and how I was going to drive and where the timing was. So again, I think it's opening up some possibilities we were resisting to some degree.
Good. Well, Liz, I want to say thank you for taking the time to share what's been going on in your world. And anyways, it's helpful to hear not just what has worked well, but what's been a challenge, and that God's been at work in all of it. So thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to get together like this again next week. I'm not sure if it'll be an interview, but just another chance for us to connect as a congregation. So thank you for staying tuned. Again, we want to ask you to stay safe. And as always, we want to stay the course because life in Jesus Christ is worth it.